Now we'll start. Sorry. Like I said, today is May 18th, 2021, and this is the Electronic Visit Verification General Stakeholder Meeting. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jordan Larson. I'm a policy specialist with the department. As a reminder, our mission is improving healthcare equity, access, and outcomes for the people we serve while saving Coloradans money on healthcare and driving value for Colorado. Again, welcome. I don't have anything for housekeeping today, but we do have some department staff that are on the line. So any department staff that would like to introduce themselves, go ahead and do so now.
Hi, this is Lana Eggers, Waiver Administration and Compliance Supervisor.
This is John Lentz with EVP Policy.
And this is Jillian
Alyssa
Estes,
Kazan.
QA Policy Specialist.
Sorry, Jillian. This is Alyssa Kazan, EVP Operations Analyst.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for being here, guys. And thank you, stakeholders, for attending today. As a reminder, the purpose of this specific meeting is to engage providers, members, other stakeholders, and the department as we all work to implement EVV for EVV required services, and specifically to clarify EVV in Colorado, discuss program updates, and provide a platform to gather stakeholder feedback. I do want to remind folks of a few things. We ask that you mind your e-manners, identify yourself when speaking, remember to share the air, listen for understanding, and stay solution and scope focused. Here's a brief overview. I got to move my, sorry, couldn't read. Brief agenda today. We're going to do a general overview of EVV, live-in caregiver quick review, an update on some EVV communications, discuss the provider choice systems notice that was sent out earlier, some EVV best practices, and then we will have our open forum. So real quickly, I'll go over a brief overview of what EVV is. For those of you that are new to EVV or are trying to figure out what's going on. So electronic visit verification is a technology solution that verifies service provision through mobile application, telephony, or web-based portal. EVV is used to ensure that home or community-based services are delivered to people needing those services by documenting the precise time service begins and ends, and also to ensure caregivers are paid for their time and efforts. Colorado EVV has been developed with engaged stakeholders, industry experts, and department staff to create a custom Colorado EVV program. What must EVV capture? That is specifically these 6 key data points. So the type of service, the individual receiving the service, the individual providing the service, the date of the service, the location, and then the time the service begins and ends. So when we talk about EVV data, those are the 6 key data points that we are referring to. Service, in terms of service location, EVV does happen in the home and the community. It's meant to capture the location where the services occurs, which includes telehealth, and it does not disrupt the flexibility of service location. The state has adopted what's called an open or hybrid system. When implementing EVV, we provide the state EVV solution that's free of charge, and then providers are also given the option to use an alternate EVV system, which we refer to as the provider choice system, if that correctly interfaces with the program rules and requirements. Providers are responsible for the correct use and transmission of EVV data. Like I said, just want to do a quick overview of EVV. I think folks have been with this for a while, so we're pretty familiar with it, but next we'll segue into the live-in caregiver review. Last general stakeholder meeting, we went over some of this, but just to reiterate, because we are seeing some confusion or some misunderstandings on live-in caregivers. So briefly, the department recognizes the unique challenges of collecting EVV for certain types of care and allows providers to be exempt from EVV if provided by a documented live-in caregiver. Services provided by live-in caregivers are often delivered incrementally and without a clearly defined start or end time. So to accommodate this, there was the live-in caregiver exemption that was created. We've released a live-in caregiver walkthrough that's found on our resources page that really walks through what is a live-in caregiver, who's eligible, what kind of supporting documentation is needed, part A, B, or C, which one do I attest to, And then we also incorporated language on how to apply, how to bill, because we had some folks who would complete the form, but they wouldn't be necessarily billing properly. So we've released that in a 4-page little infographic that breaks down everything you need to know about a live-in caregiver, whether it is if you're eligible, how to apply, how to bill, things of that nature. So really quickly, just wanted to hit on that specific resource that we released that was really based on feedback we were getting from folks that were participating in the live-in caregiver exemption. So if you may qualify or are eligible to be exempt from EVV because of a live-in caregiver situation, please give that a review. But always, if you have any kind of questions around that, feel free to reach out to the department. And then if you have additional questions or you're more of a text person, we also released last May a live-in caregiver memo that details the similar things that the infographic covers, such as eligibility, requirements, the responsibilities and liabilities of the parties involved, as well as the billing methodology. Are there any questions on the live-in caregiver exemption form or that those specific materials? I just wanted to pause really quickly. I know I'm going kind of quick, guys, so I'll try to slow down a little bit. But are there any questions specifically to live-in caregivers? It looks like Jillian has also dropped a link for those of you that are joining by computer for how to access those resources. But for those on the phone, you can go to the resources page on the EVV website, and you can also find those under the live-in caregiver section. But any questions on live-in caregiver? And you can also type those in the chat. I guess I'll remind folks too to press *6 if you would like to unmute yourself. All right, not seeing any, so we'll keep moving along. Next, we're going to go over some of the EVV communications that have recently been released. A few updates. We are going to be discontinuing the weekly emails where we communicate the specific denial buckets or non-utilizers. Those are the ones that were sent by Gainwell, and those would be sent to your service email address. So we're going to be discontinuing those, and we're going to be primarily be utilizing the EVV report cards and some other communications because we do want to make sure that we are providing consistent communication, but we also received a little bit of feedback that that was a little bit overkill. And so we wanted to kind of make our communications as effective as possible. So you will no longer be receiving those weekly denial bucket emails, but we will continue to send the EVV report cards as well as some other communications. Specifically, we'll be sending emails to the non-utilizers, which will be requesting them to complete an EVV form. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes to complete. But if there are folks that have not implemented or are not submitting EVV data, you can probably expect to get a email from us or already have. That's primarily meant so that we can get an update on your status, see if you need any kind of support. A lot of folks were just almost across the finish line when we sent this kind of thing out, but we as a department are just trying to make sure that you have as much support as possible. And if you're running into any kind of obstacles, we can help you with that. I should also note that because we did run into some situations where some folks had accidentally billed EVV required services. If that's the case, you will be added to that list. And so if you receive that communication, I would still ask that you complete that form. But by providing those details, we will follow up and get in touch with you to make sure it wasn't a mistake, because we've also found some folks didn't think that they were required to submit EVV, but either based on the type of service or the place of service, they do fall under that requirement. So if you see that email, fill out the form, and we'll be sure to follow up with you as soon as possible to make sure that we can clear things up or provide any kind of support that may be needed. The EVV report cards, so these are the monthly educational emails that are sent to give insight on agency-specific EVV performance. In the next few slides, I'll show examples of what those look like. But we send those out at the beginning of the month, and those are strictly an educational tool. Those are not anything that are necessarily, I guess, like required, but those are something that we send out so that as agencies work to implement EVV, they can kind of evaluate what's going really well, what needs improvement. The data in those is based on all claims that were paid for the respective month. And it does contain the past 4 months, the pay rate percentage, dollar amount to pay. And we also include a infographic with tips on how to improve that performance. Pay rate in this context is basically the claims that are expected to pay once the claim edit is active. So no claims are going to be denied at this point due to EVV, but it is meant to be, like I said, an educational tool that's to give you an idea. If the claim edit was on, this is what my performance would be, this is what my pay rate would be. And those emails are sent from the EVV inbox to the service email address on file. And I'll try to describe this to anyone that's joining by phone, but these report cards, they, in the one that I have on the screen right now is just kind of like a template to, like I said, to avoid any kind of confusion. But if, for example, you fell in the range of 1 to 50 pay rate, this would basically list your specific provider ID, your agency name, because we want it to be clear that this is specifically for this agency and this Medicaid ID. It then goes on to list the specific percentage. So say you fell under like 20% of your claims would pay, and then it would have a dollar amount. And then below that is a small table that lists the specific months with past percentages, and then the future one, which would be like TBD. So that's in general what these EVV report cards are. If you are new to those, we plan to continue to submit those. We did think that the table might get a little bit lengthy, so we're just going to kind of keep it to like the quarterly reporting rather than as the year goes on. You won't expect to have December and January in the same report card, but we do plan to continue to submit those. I'll also highlight that we include a infographic with all of these EVV report cards that is meant to give guidance on maybe how to improve your performance. We have seen some questions asking, how do we improve? Obviously, that is a case-by-case scenario, but based on some of the information and the questions we're getting, we try to incorporate that information into these infographics. So this isn't us just kind of like shooting in the dark. We are really trying to provide guidance that is based on current information. So when we send those out, I do recommend folks to review those infographics. So maybe to give insight on maybe what they're doing incorrectly or how they can improve their performance. Next, we'll touch lightly on EVV and hospice. Hospice services may be provided without EVV records and will no longer be receiving department outreach on compliance. I will note, though, that providers that offer hospice services along with other services will receive this outreach regarding only non-hospice services. So we've gotten some questions about hospice, so wanted to kind of clear that up. And then we'll talk about the provider choice notice. We, I believe last week, sent out an email to those using a provider choice system. It primarily kind of hit on if you are experiencing any significant delays or uncertainty when you're going to be able to actually successfully perform EVV. We were recommending you switch to the state EVV solution. So that way you can come into compliance as soon as possible and avoid any potential future denied claims. I'll remind folks that it is the provider's responsibility to ensure all visits are recorded in the vendor's technology and they're successfully sent to SAN data, which can be verified in the data aggregator. If you get into the data aggregator and there aren't any visits appearing, we would first recommend that you contact your vendor to ensure that visits are being sent. There's been some scenarios where everybody thought everything was being stored in the right place and everything's going well, but they go and look in the aggregator and there's no visits, and that can be due to a few different reasons, but we recommend your first step be to contact your vendor to make sure that that data is being sent. Also wanted to, part of the reason too that we want to kind of maybe recommend considering temporarily or permanently switching to the state EVV solution. Agencies have tended to, when using the state solution, to have an easier transition and experience fewer obstacles in implementing EVV. This has resulted in approximately 30% higher compliance rates than agencies using provider choice systems. Again, to temporarily or permanently switch to the state solution is a solution that you may want to consider if you're using a provider choice notice and you don't have a clear date or you're experiencing significant obstacles. Like I said, it's a free solution that's complimentary from the department. And so like I said, if you have these uncertainties, temporarily or permanently switching is a solution that's out there that can help alleviate that relatively quickly. We have released guidance on how to switch to the different technologies, whether you want to go from state solution to provider choice or vice versa. We have released guidance on how to specifically to do that. So you can find that again on the EVV resources page. And then the last thing, and then we'll kind of hop into some questions if there are any. Email addresses being out of date, I want to just say that it's the provider's responsibility to ensure email addresses on files up to date in the Gainwell provider portal. It tends to cause some delays due to like when you receive credentials or communications being sent. Sometimes folks will have a different administrator or person come into a role where they oversee like EVV or are responsible for that kind of thing. It's really important that you update that as soon as possible so that like with these EVV report cards or any kinds of other department communications, they'll be sent using those service location email addresses. So making sure that that is a valid and up-to-date email address is really important to avoid any, like I said, kind of delays or miscommunications of any kind. If while hearing this, you're like, oh, we need to update our email address. So-and-so hasn't been there for a while. We've also released guidance on how to do this. This is something that the provider does need to perform themselves, but it lists out in detail how to update the provider email address at Gainwell Technologies. And that lists also how to update if you want to update your billing location email address or something like that. It also lists that.
Hey, Jordan, this
Yep.
is Jillian with the department. I just wanted to add on to that if you don't mind.
Sure.
So what in my outreach to folks related to the email addresses, sometimes I think providers are going in and updating their profile contact information. And I want to be really clear to follow this guidance because it kind of walks you down the rabbit hole you have to go through in order to get to that service location. So if there was any assumptions there, which one to update, just follow that guidance so you get to the right one.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And so, like I said, I'll pause again. Are there any questions out there? I did see one question in the chat, but if anybody that's on the phone or computer, feel free to unmute yourself by pressing *6 and feel free to ask any questions that were related to what's been reviewed thus far.
Hey guys, it's Alec here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Alec.
Yeah, really more a comment more than a question. Certainly appreciate the option to switch to the state EVV system, but I think I've said it before. We need to be very clear. For most large-size providers or even medium-sized providers, this is not really feasible because most of us cannot really go back to manual portal billing or do manual payroll, which is what you lose if you switch from your third provider choice system to the state EVV system. We've done sort of some calculations how much it would cost us, and we would basically end up hiring 2 to 3 additional people. So, for us at least, it is not really an option that we could pursue even if we wanted to. So just bear with that in mind. It's an option mainly for smaller agencies that can still deal with the volume and have lower volume and can still do manual billing and manual payroll. But for many of the bigger folks, it's not really an option, unfortunately. Thank you.
And this is Alyssa with the department, and I'll just put this out there too.
as far as using like a provider choice system, we're just referring to like the visit verification piece of it. So you can still use like an alternate vendor to send data over to bill, right? We're just talking about using the state solution for the visit verification piece of it. So it wouldn't necessarily take away like the billing part with a vendor.
Yeah, but then you're using two systems. You have to have the data in two systems. I mean, I'm not sure that that's much better.
Yep, and you're definitely right that it is the added piece, right? So maybe you can't get your vendor to use the visit verification piece, or like they're not sending it correctly. But I just want everybody else to know that it doesn't take away that billing piece, but it does, yes, separate it into two separate things. So if we think back to prior to EVV, you know, you're billing maybe with an outside biller. You can still use that. You just can't maybe use the visit verification piece of it if they're not sending the data over appropriately.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing both of those perspectives. Like I said, I think that's both really good information to know. So thank you both. Are there any other questions or I guess suppose comments based on what we've gone over thus far? And I'll remind folks we will have an open forum later, but just want to see if there's any other questions out there. In that case, we'll keep going. EVV best practices. So as we've, like I said, seen, you know, a lot more folks utilizing EVV throughout the past few months. There are some different things that we would like to communicate to hopefully help people transition as smoothly and perform EVV as best as possible. So we're gonna go over a few different things in terms of EVV best practices. The first one that we're still seeing is folks with multiple IDs maybe having some confusion on how they're supposed to collect EVV or just perform EVV overall when they are an agency with multiple IDs. So providers with more than one Medicaid ID will need more than one STX account. So as an example, if you have Medicaid ID 001 that does home health and nursing, they need STX 001. And obviously these numbers aren't going to be what it's like with, say, like Sandata and an actual Medicaid ID, but just to keep things simple. So we have Medicaid ID 001 and STX 001, and then you have Medicaid ID 002, and they deliver personal care and they need STX 002. Any home health nursing visits will want to collect EVV under that STX 001 because it's associated with the Medicaid ID 001, which is going to submit claims for those specific services. The personal care visits will then want to be collected under STX 002 because, again, it's associated with the claims that are being billed for personal care. Those who need an additional STX account will need to request additional credentials from Sandata. Doesn't mean you'll necessarily have to take the training all over, but you will need additional credentials to collect EVV appropriately. Some folks were trying to collect all their EVV under one STX account, and which will cause an issue when it comes to billing. So if you have multiple IDs and you only currently have one STX, or you have some questions about how to properly perform EVV in that scenario, having multiple STX accounts is a good place to start. When it comes to respite care, we've started to see an increase in questions around respite. So there's kind of two scenarios here that hopefully will outline and clear up some of this, but can't necessarily cover everything just in a stakeholder meeting. But specifically, if you perform in-home respite care that bills these 15-minute units, so if you're on the brain injury waiver, generally recommended that caregivers collect EVV data for all time spent providing care. So you'll clock in at the beginning and then clock out at the end, just like you ordinarily would for EVV. But those that are billing per day, you want to ensure the EVV record for each calendar day, that there's EVV record for each calendar day that services were provided. So if you delivered care on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you will want to have an EVV record for each day. But because of how, because we don't know when service necessarily ended, the system isn't going to look for hours within the EDV record for exactly match the time of service. This is specifically just for the per day or per diem respite care. But when you perform EDV across days, you don't need to necessarily clock in, clock out for each, because there is like that uncertainty of when it actually ended. But like I said, we've seen an uptick in questions specifically for this. So if you're billing the individual units, you'll want to collect EDV as you ordinarily would. So clock in, clock out. But with the individual daycare, you'll want to ensure that when services start, clock in, but the system again is not going to look for the specific hours within the EDV record to exactly match, but shouldn't impact billing. Additionally, some other provider best practices, just as kind of more of like routine things to look out for. So you'll want to kind of make a habit out of reviewing the Sandata portal or the data aggregator, depending on if you use a state solution or provider choice. But you'll want to routinely do this to assess the performance, make sure that the visits are present, all exceptions are addressed, and visits are verified. We've had some folks specifically with, manually entering some of their visits and not inserting like a location. So it just sits in the aggregator or the portal as unverified. And to them, it looks like they're doing everything right. But if you scroll all the way to the right, you'll see it's incomplete. But definitely making a habit out of checking the portal prior to submitting your claims to make sure that everything's clean, everything's there, any exceptions have been addressed. You can also alternatively, after claims have been submitted, you can review the remittance advice to identify any problem areas. Specifically, we have that error code EOB 3054 that right now we're in a place where we're not denying claims, but that specific error code is meant to help you identify what claim lines specifically required EVV and it wasn't there, or where you're having issues specifically with EVV. Additionally, I'll just add that the department is trying to work on launching kind of an EVV best practices document for how to most efficiently collect EVV, things to do before submitting EVV and then after. If you have any feedback on this, we really want to make this as valuable as possible. We understand that providers do have limited time and don't necessarily have all the time in the world to read every single document that exists for EVV. So we thought to kind of address that obstacle to kind of create a more curated document that is meant to help people perform EVV as best as possible. We've seen some other states release a similar document, and we're hoping to kind of execute a similar thing. And so if you have any kind of feedback on what kind of information would be valuable to have in that, please contact either the EVV inbox. We have our EVV feedback form, or you can give us a call at 303-866-3580. We're definitely interested in making this document as valuable as possible without making it like a full-blown textbook. But as folks have started, like I said, utilizing EVV at a significantly higher rate, we want you to perform as best as possible. So working on hopefully releasing that in the near future. But if anybody has any insight on that, we would definitely be interested in hearing. Okay, in regards to EVV best practices, are there any questions or comments there? I see some questions have been already answered in the chat. Making sure I'm not missing anything, but department staff seem to have addressed any questions that have been texted so far. But like I said, press *6 if you'd like to unmute yourself. I just want to take a quick moment to pause in case there are any questions. All right, keep chugging along. EVV program updates, the Sandata Call Center report. In terms of the calls received, there was 78 total calls. Of those 78 presented, 78 were answered. So 100% success rate there, with 0% being abandoned. And then the call times, kind of what to expect. The average wait time for a call rep was 10.5 seconds. And the average time with a call rep was about 7.70 minutes. All right, and then now we will segue into our open forum. I'll remind folks for any questions on the phone to unmute yourself. Please share the air. If you have a question that you would prefer to type and we read out, you can type those questions directly in the chat box. Keep in mind that everyone can see those, but if you have a question and maybe you're having technical issues, you can go ahead and type those in the chat box. I'll remind folks, please do not share any kind of personal health information or personal identifying information, because obviously, but if your question is pertinent to, or if personal health information or PII is pertinent to your question, please email an encrypted email to the EVV inbox at evv@state.co.us. But with that being said, guys, like I said, we can kind of open up the lines to anybody that has any questions. I guess there's a question in the chat that I can read while we kind of get into things here. What is the best resolution to correct line edits that deny for EVV data once it's live? So meaning once the claim edit is live.
Hi, this is Alyssa, and I can take this one. The best way to basically, I guess, get it paid, right? So if you have a line that denies, if it denies altogether, so the whole claim denies, you can just resubmit after you've fixed the EVV record. If a piece of the claim has paid, then you'll need to reprocess the record. But you'll want to make the changes in the EVV record first and then do those, either resubmit or rebill. And keep in mind that we have the nightly transfer. So if you make a change to your EVV record today, you can bill for it tomorrow.
Looks like we got a thank you, Alyssa, and thank you for taking that question. Appreciate it.
Yep, and
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to add really quick on top of that. Two really useful things that come in are your ICN, obviously, so the claim that has a denied line. And then the other half of that is your visit ID. And I think that we've mentioned it earlier in the meeting, but you can find that in the detailed visit status report, and that's in SAN-Data. So Gainwell has a way to look at those visits. So if you call and you say, okay, this line was denied, here's my visit ID, why didn't it match? They can say, oh, you have, the wrong client, or whatever the situation might be. And then you can go back and make those changes, resubmit or reprocess. So that's more of like the tailored if you're not entirely sure why it denied.
Hey guys, it's Alec here. I have another question, and maybe Alyssa can help out with this one. It might be a little technical and I might not be able to phrase it 100% correctly, but we have seen a really significant drop in our EVV compliance. I think we went from roughly around 10% to now being in the 50 to 99% non-compliant compliance brackets, even though we as an agency did nothing in terms of changing our behavior to warrant that. And SAN-Data has explained to us that they, I guess, based on your guidance, are now enforcing, I think, two things that weren't enforced in the past. One has to do with visits that have no in-call and no out-call, that they would require an additional reason code. And the other one was that also you need to put an address in the notes line if you have such a thing. I'm not sure if I'm representing this correctly, but basically that led to the huge drop I described earlier. in our EVV compliance, and we're working with Sandata to resolve that. However, I also understand that's going to take some time. Did you guys see this across the board? Other people having the same issue? I'm assuming the requirement to put in for example, the home address also applies to the state EVV system. I've just not heard anything about this before, and just wondered if you guys can comment a little bit on that. Thank you.
Sure, and I can take this one. This is Alyssa. So the two changes that we did put in place, not necessarily changes, I would say, but we recognized that some visits were getting accepted without a location. So that's the first one that Alec is talking about, where it doesn't have a call in or a call out that was captured at the time of service, right? So TVV or MVV, how they captured the client's location or the GPS, it wasn't capturing that. So a fully manual visit does require the reason code to be entered with the client's location. So that was the first one, which is kind of a hole that we found in there. And then I'm so sorry, what was the second one that you had mentioned? I kind of got caught up on that one.
The second one, or my first one, was that when you have calls or visits that have no in-call and no out-call, so not or, but they lack both, that there's a second reason code that needed to be submitted by the system.
And I think that's the one that I'm talking about. So the two changes were, if there is an adjusted time in and adjusted time out, is where we require the location to be entered via the reason code. And realistically, the two changes that we made were gaps in the system where we saw that, a visit wasn't coming over with all points of data. And it was tied mainly to alternate systems that weren't sending all 6 points of data. So the edits that were enforced do follow what our technical specifications have outlined, so needing to send all of those 6 points of data.
Well, Alyssa, does that in practice mean, though, that everybody on visits that have no in and no out call will have to manually type in, let's say, the home address of the client? Because that's, depending on the size of your agency, that could be a lot of work.
It's following, I guess I'll do it from the higher level. Each visit has to have a location of the client. So however the system is accurately recording where the location took place on the service is how it would need to come over. We do have the reason code or the exception reason code and reason code note that follow in line, where you can enter the client's address. And that's for those circumstances where a system can't capture the client's location. So I don't want to say that's the only way that you would need to do it, but that is the functionality that we have to record when the client's location is inaccurate or not captured.
And sorry, just to make sure I understand this correctly, and it wouldn't have been captured if there was no in or out call. Sorry, and in and out call, because when you don't have, essentially that means you don't have a clock in, and if you didn't have a clock in and no clock out, you didn't capture the location. That's the logic, right?
Yep, that is the logic. And I think that we're saying the same thing. So a manually entered visit, right? Using the adjusted times. But yeah, the EVV record needs to have all 6 points of data. So in a manually entered record, you need to manually enter the client's location. I just want to make sure we're on the same page with that terminology with call in and call out.
Okay, and sorry, the other thing I was asking is, I'm just trying to understand, how big the impact was, because, on our side, and I guess that would hold true for most Colorado SAM users, the impact was quite dramatic. So I'm just wondering, did you see an overall decline in compliance when this was introduced? And if so, I assume it was mainly on the third-party choice side, or I don't know if you can comment to that if you have that data.
I don't have that data. I don't know if anybody else does. But just to reiterate it again, the compliance issue that we saw was with alternate vendors who weren't sending all 6 points of data. So the visits were getting accepted when they were in compliant. So just the whole fix itself is just making sure that we have all of those 6 points of data.
I have a question. I'm Regina from Cheyenne Village in the Springs, and I did a training with some staff in regards to using their cell phone. And so that is showing up under visit maintenance, but it's not complete because it wasn't meant to be complete. Is that going to be an issue down the line?
Regina, are you saying that the visits are labeled as incomplete?
Yeah, like because they weren't visits. I was just training them on how to do a visit.
Gotcha. Nope, that's completely fine. If there are previous ones, we don't have the billing linked to visits necessarily in the EVV system, right? So if you submit a visit, it doesn't get sent to the department to bill. You'd still have to bill outside of that. So if you have additional visits in your account, it's not gonna, yeah.
Okay, so you don't get it until it's in Thera for us. Or it's
We can still see like in process or incomplete, but you can only match a visit, a verified visit to a billed claim. And again, if you have an incomplete visit, that doesn't mean that it's going to like automatically bill us. They're two separate.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yep.
Sorry, does somebody have a question? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut somebody off. I was just going to see if there's any other questions. Sorry about that.
If nobody has one, I'll throw another one at you.
Sure.
Just wondering if there was any progress. We had submitted a request a while back for for the department to explore the option of additional reason codes, because we found, at least the way we work, a lot of the reason codes didn't apply, and the ones that we kind of needed weren't there. So I'm just wondering if there was any progress on that issue.
Hey, this is Alyssa, and I can take this one too. I did see your response in the EVV inbox. And I guess maybe to reiterate, it would be using, so it would need to be like your alternate vendor system, using whatever reason code that they have. They would just need to send it as that, I think it's 16 is other. So whatever your internal reason code structure is completely fine as long as it comes over listed as like reason code other, or it maps to something that is in our system. Because we can't necessarily add another reason code, but we can, or I guess agencies can utilize their own reason codes as long as they're labeled as that other reason code.
Okay, that's good to know, but other requires a comment, doesn't it?
Yep, and I think that's kind of where I was going with it. So let's say your alternate vendor has a reason code labeled as telehealth. If they want to use their reason code telehealth and then send it in as reason code other 16, and then the comment would be telehealth, like kind of like a pre-populated, however it would come over. So just like an example right there, you could maybe have your alternate vendor have the comment as telehealth if it were mapped correctly on the back end.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, again, this is partly all about volume. What we're trying to get away from, given the volume we have, is to have to use other, because then you have to provide the comment on stuff that should be routine. That's why we're asking about these reason codes, so we can select them, let's say telehealth, and that will be that we don't have to write a comment, because right now I could just select other as the reason code and write telehealth. So that doesn't really solve the issue in my mind, at least.
Sure, I understand what you're saying. I think it would be a conversation to have with the alternate vendor to say like, hey, I don't want to enter this every single time. Can we utilize one of your reason codes? And every time I, click this reason code, you send it to SANdata as reason code 16 other, and then the comment would be the one that you selected. So it would maybe be like a mapping on their side. If they have the reason codes, they could probably send it in that way, but we would need to accept it as that reason code other. But I do see what you're saying. I don't think that the solution that I'm talking through is you writing out a comment, because that doesn't get to the point.
Okay, thank you.
Could I go back and just get a little better clarification about what those 2 additional edits were that were causing his numbers to drop? Was this something added after the fact?
Hi, this is
Chris with
Alyssa, and I
BetterHelp.
can talk through that. Yep. So nothing was added after the fact. So when an alternate vendor sends data into SANdata, there's a series of edits that get placed on the visit or file that comes in. Essentially, a verified visit needs to have all 6 points of data, and we realized that visits were getting accepted as verified, and they didn't have all 6 points of data. So the edit that was turned on was just ensuring that location was present.
And can real briefly, I mean, just so I have clarification, because I'm also reporting back to my people here. What specifically are those 6 points?
Jordan, do you want to maybe go back to the slide at the beginning that has the 6 points?
Sure. Give me a minute.
Let me ask first. I don't know if you've called in or if you can see the Zoom, but I can read them out too.
I mean, just in terms of the reason codes that are required, I think it's 0, 2, and 41. And the change, or not change, but a new enforcement was that both of them were required. So that kind of impacted our system.
Yep, and that is and we do have that in the specifications outline. So if GPS data is not sent over with the initial file and the location is not recorded in those files is when you'll need to use exception 41. So you can send location of the visit as you normally would, or like as your vendor normally would, but if it's not present in that file, I think it's the visit call file, is when you'll need to use exception 41 reason code. I think it's 14 or 15. And then just to go back to the initial question, I'm not sure if you are on the Zoom or if you're just called in, but I'll read out the 6 points of data.
No,
The
no.
type of service performed.
Oh, go ahead. I am on the Zoom call. I am seeing it. I think I just missed it. And
Okay.
and I think we are, trying to capture all of this. I would say one of our biggest errors, however, seems to be when we go back to staff to find out why it's not being captured properly. It's that location of service delivery. And the staff will say, I was right there, or, I started my visit at the door, or it's an apartment complex, or, that I had to find the patient outside, or I mean, so some of those things, trying to figure out how to best resolve those.
Sure, and just to maybe like backtrack a little into the location piece of it, you can record service location wherever the service is delivered. So we don't have a GPS distance exception necessarily. So if you're outside of the door, maybe like it's recording the service like across the street or something, it'll still capture that location, which is the point that I'm talking about. So maybe there's a different piece if you're getting an exception on location that's separate from what I'm talking about, but as long as it's getting recorded, that would fulfill that location checkpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and if you do have any questions, you can always send them into the EBV inbox at ebv@state.co.us. So if it's, maybe a tinier piece that's not necessarily what I'm talking about, we can still talk through it.
I was trying to unmute myself. My mouse isn't cooperating today. Awesome. I do see a question in the chat, but like I said, if anybody wants to verbalize theirs, they can unmute yourself by pressing *6. These are all great questions we've had so far. But in case anybody else was also, I know we've had kind of a good amount of questions. So if anybody else has any other questions, I'll pause real quick.
Hi, this is Azita from Centralish. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep. I have a quick question. Maybe for Alyssa, I guess, again. When you send a visit in to the aggregator, and let's say the service code is not correct, one of the service codes that's listed in that group, you get a rejection, right? Because the service code is not listed there. Would a copy of that visit be saved in SAM data, or that's considered not even like recording in SAM data aggregator?
So my understanding, and I guess for everybody listening, this is just with alternate vendor like file transfer, so not on the provider side. But if the record if it gets rejected from the aggregator, then we don't see it, which is I think what you're asking. So we wouldn't see it if the record was completely rejected.
Okay, so if the record is rejected because something is wrong with the visit, then it would not even show up in the aggregator until it's resended, correct?
Yep.
I'm just questioning it because when you go
Oh,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the rejection of the record, if it's accepted and it has like the wrong service, but it was accepted into there, we'll see that. But if the record is rejected back to you, then we won't.
Okay, I was just questioning it because of the omit section of it. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Gotcha. Yep, and I'll actually maybe explain that too for anybody who's using a third party or the state solution. So state solution, you can mark your records omitted, which means that you can't bill against them. And then you can also see that in the visit review. So you'll see a little checkbox that is labeled do not bill, I believe, and it's checked, and then the visit status is omit. The same with alternate vendors. So on the provider choice side of it, you can send, and I don't have the specifications in front of me right now, but you can essentially say, I'd like to mark this as omitted. So yeah, that would be like you change the indicator to say it's marked as omitted, not necessarily like a rejected record.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. And there's another question, and Alyssa, I'll take this one, give you a break. But there's a question that says, are providers getting the error or notice that their system is not sending all 6 points since the edit was turned on? I'm kind of seeing two parts to that question. The first one, the claim edit is not currently turned on. So that's just want to clear that up real quick. We are kind of in that's kind of, I don't know if you want to call it an onboarding stage, but we're doing pay and report. And so to answer the second part of the question, providers will see the error code, the EOB 3054 error code if their specific claims do not have the required EBV. That error code is not going to tell you specifically you were missing location, you were missing time or whatever. That's kind of more what the SAN data portal or the data aggregator is for, because, and that's why I was saying earlier in those best practices, it's really important to maybe review those prior to submitting your claims, just to make sure that all the data is clean. And if there are any kind of spacing on the word right now, exceptions that need to be addressed. Like if something is missing location, you would be able to identify that earlier on. So there's kind of two ways to go about it. There's the pre or the post. So I would recommend the pre, get ahead of the game kind of approach, where prior to submitting your claims, you are looking in the portal or the aggregator to make sure that that all the data is there and present. Or after claims have been submitted, you can look at your remittance advice and you'll see that EOB 3054 error code, which indicates, generally speaking, that EVV was not present when it was required. But let me know if I missed anything or if you have any follow-up questions to that. All right, got verbal confirmation. I see another question. When is it appropriate to use the other reason codes besides manual entry? Our third-party vendor has told us to only use manual entry when something goes wrong with EVV capture in the appointment.
This is Alyssa. As far as the reason codes go, you can select the one that is the most appropriate to the situation. We're not necessarily, tracking it back to look, that's the reason code that you should have selected. Manual entry is used to record the client's location. So when you do select that one, you should enter the client's location in there. There are other situations where you would use manual entry. So maybe like a missed appointment, right, that needs to be added after the appointment time. Otherwise, I would just select the one that's most appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. I see one more question. They were just curious, is there a date that the pre-claim review will begin? We still have not identified that date. We're still trying to make sure that people are utilizing at the best performance possible, but we have not released a definitive date when the claim edit will be turned on. But I'll just remind folks that we've committed to that 30-day window, so that when we do make that determination, we'll give more than a heads up to when that is, but there is not a specific date identified at this time. Any other questions out there? Like I said, these have all been fantastic questions, guys. So don't if you have one out there, please ask away. Otherwise, we'll segue into kind of like wrapping up. So like I said, I'll pause again if there's any other questions out there, either written or verbal. Guess I was reading another question, and this just could be maybe overdoing it, but I'm going back to the question about the claim edit and the error codes, and if it can kind of like indicate, if it's sending all 6 points of data and everything like that. The EOB 3054 has been there for a while. Maybe if you're new to EVV, it's a new thing, but it's been there specifically for EVV. So we were thinking maybe perhaps that when someone started to see that, maybe that was like indicating, oh, the claim edit's on, but that's actually part of our kind of, like I said, our onboarding stage of EVV, so that we can communicate which specific claims required EVV and didn't have them. So I feel like we're kind of kicking a dead horse at this point, but I did want to kind of maybe bring up, perhaps if you're suddenly seeing that specific error, that is why. So like I said, could be kind of overdoing making the point here, but just wanted to clarify on that. I guess I'll just do one last call for questions, guys. If there's any other questions out there, we'll do one last call. All right, I guess in that case, guys, I'll just remind folks of the various EVV recurring meetings. This particular meeting, the next one will be June 15th, same time, same place. As you've noticed, we transitioned to Zoom. So 10:30 to noon, June 15th, we'll have our next general stakeholder meeting. We have concluded our member and caregiver meetings. Our last meeting was last month. But if any members or caregivers do have any feedback or would like to get in touch with us, we have all kinds of different support channels in place, which I'll go over next. But the member and caregiver meeting has been discontinued. We're also still hosting our listening sessions, which are the first Thursday of the month and the Thursdays following the EVV general stakeholder meeting. So our next meeting is going to be this Thursday, May 20th. That's from 10 to 11, and we do those through Google Meet. And then the one following that will be June 17th. At, again, 10 and 11 a.m. As a reminder, what the EVV listening sessions are, those are informal settings for questions, discussions about EVV. We don't tend to, as a department, come with things necessarily planned. It's really stakeholders' time to bring up any kind of questions, discussion points, experiences, things like that. They're very much like the EVV office hours we used to hold, and are meant to be a really productive use of time, open for all to participate. And again, those are the first and third Thursday of each month. All this information for just different stakeholder meetings is available on the department's EVV website under stakeholder information. And then as a reminder for those different support pathways, if you have questions about using the state solution, interfacing your provider choice systems, trainings, or something specific with your EVV account, you'll want to contact the EVV help desk, which is 1-855-871-8780, or you can send them an email at cocustomercare@sandata.com. We have the Gainwell help desk, which is specific to provider billing or claims processing questions. Really recommend having your Medicaid ID, ICN, or visit ID information ready when you contact them, because that can really help them dig in and find any kind of, if you're having issues with a particular claim or anything like that. So when you have that particular information, you can really make the most use of the time there and hopefully not having to contact somebody else. So make sure you have that information prior to contacting them. That phone number is 1-844-235-2387. There's the EVV inbox, which is evv@state.co.us. If you have live-in caregiver documentation that needs to review, help desk documentation, oh, sorry, read the wrong column there. If you have a live-in caregiver exemption that needs to be reviewed, policy and program answers, any kind of escalations from other support methods, that's what you want to contact that channel for. And the stakeholder feedback that I referenced earlier, if you have any members, caregivers, or stakeholders in general that would like to give the department feedback on how things are going, maybe something, an idea on they'd like to see improvement on, anything like that, you can submit that form, or you can just call at 303-866-3580. This was put in place to kind of still allow a resource for anyone that's using EVV, but specifically for members and caregivers, so they can give the department feedback. And last but not least, again, the EVV inbox is evv@state.co.us. We also recommend signing up for the department's distribution list. You can access that link through this presentation, which we'll post, and select the electronic visit verification stakeholder group. Otherwise, you can see all things EVV at hcpf.colorado.gov/EVV. Last, I'll just say thank you, everybody, for attending today. This is a really great general stakeholder meeting. I hope you will join us next month. If you have any questions and weren't able to ask them, please send those questions to the EVV inbox or whatever the appropriate support channel is. Otherwise, guys, thank you very much for your attendance today and have a great day.
Thank you, you too.